In Albuquerque, we've heard a lot of concerns about the pro-home zoning reforms that would lift the ban on middle housing in tienditas, ranging from traffic and neighborhood changes to affordability and property taxes. We asked Las Cruces Councilor Becky Corran what people were worried about before Realize Las Cruces passed a zoning reform package that successfully legalized middle housing in tienditas, and what actually happened afterward.
Well, I represent a primarily single family neighborhood, and I know that folks really have an orientation to that, but folks are also clamoring for access and to keep their families close to them. And so that type of diversity, right? Allowing for multi-use spaces that have apartments above and stores below is what those folks wanted. They just didn't realize that zoning was the thing that was actually preventing them from having that. And so I think when you talk a little bit more with folks who say, single family homes are really important to me, when you talk about what that means, it often means autonomy, right? Yeah. Having your family close to you, being able to have connections with neighbors, and all of those things come with zoning reform.
Councilor Corran spoke about how fears weren't dismissed and how they were addressed directly within the zoning code.
What I would say is a lot of people said things like, oh, I don't want a big business right next to my house, right? I don't want added traffic. I don't want added light pollution. And those are all part of the zoning code, right? We limit the amount of light that commercial businesses are allowed to use. And that was part of our update really significantly. We have conversations about the parking and what kind of parking requirements exist. And reforming those, which was part of our overhaul altogether, really addresses a lot of the issues that folks had in those concerns. We hadn't codified even pedestrian. What does a pedestrian-friendly streetscape look like in our official zoning code? This zoning code just enables people to do something different when the time comes for them to do something different. But it also will make a huge impact on future development.
Councilor Corran also spoke about how the lack of middle housing affects the entire housing chain, from homelessness on one end to single-family homes on the other.
We know that while we have folks living on the street, about 250 in Las Cruces, we know that we have more than 1,000 people who are on the verge of becoming homeless because there isn't a housing type that they can move into based on their income and the location primarily. And that was in part because we had prohibited building different types of housing for those folks at different levels, right? So then there are some apartment complexes that have everyone of all different income levels, many of whom would probably love to be in a home, or would love to be in a duplex, right? Like I live in a townhouse, but those missing middle houses have not been something that we've emphasized in our development. So folks just stay in their apartment, right? And so then that apartment isn't available for someone who's just trying to off the street or is housing insecure and might become homeless. There's no place for them to go. So every place where we can open up that market through market rate housing, through affordable housing, through public-private partnerships, which I think we leverage really powerfully here in Las Cruces. The zoning reform has really helped us. About 96% of the city, that was not allowed, right? And so developers would have to spend an inordinate amount of time going to appeals and doing all of those things to just build a tiny plot of affordable housing, right? And Realize Las Cruces enabled us to shorten that timeline and make it easier for folks to build. And now I'm happy to say that large swaths of the entire city are open to affordable housing development of all types. Thinking about the housing spectrum, homelessness at one end, single family home at another end, we want to be able to open doors to every one of those places, right?
We also spoke about fears about changes in tax assessment have not manifested in Las Cruces due to zoning change.
I think tax assessment is a really good example of this. We're very lucky in New Mexico to have a protective tax assessment model that allows us to have limited increases in our property taxes. And so I think that's one variable that thankfully isn't something that we've experienced here. Our zoning reform hasn't changed that, but it has changed how, when someone does want to approve a property, what does that mean for the surrounding neighborhood, right? What does that mean in terms of contributing to the neighborhood and including their tax sort of liabilities? That conversation is happening, but that's not been the primary function of zoning. I think about myself when I got my own place, which again is a townhouse. It was just 7 years ago, and my house has appreciated by $100,000, and I couldn't afford it with the job that I have right now. I couldn't afford to buy that house, right? That townhouse. And so I think about folks in my position that we're hiring at the community college, that we're hiring at the city. But even more, I think I would urge folks to consider those folks that are moving away, right? Yeah. That can't get a job in Albuquerque because they can't afford to live there, right? Or people who graduate from UNM and they want to work in the city It's a very happening place. Young people really are driven to cities, and New Mexico, Albuquerque is where it's at. And you're missing those folks, right?
Yeah.
Which I think really drives home the idea of like, we would like to keep folks in our community. And I think the fears are one thing, but fearing things that we know are already happening, people leaving because they can't afford housing, because they're going to other places like Austin, where they did reform zoning, right? And work really hard to address those issues. Those fears should also play into the equation, I think. This is not helping folks stay in our city. This is not helping us build new things. This isn't innovating our community. And the other thing that really changed how I think about this is that zoning has always been a tool to that people have, one of many levers that we have to build spaces that are either inclusive or exclusive. And fundamentally, I want to be a city councilor who says our city is welcoming to you, period. Whoever you are, wherever you're coming from. And fundamentally, that's reforming zoning is a direct function of that. Whether or not you take the time to learn all of those historical processes or bureaucratic things that exist, if you fundamentally believe that you want Albuquerque, or if you want Las Cruces to be a truly welcoming place, zoning reform is where it's at. And so for me, that's a very powerful realization.